104 victories, 0 losses. Not once in over 50 years has an enemy aircraft shot down the F-15 Eagle in air-to-air combat. This is not propaganda. This is not exaggeration. This is documented military history verified by defense analysts from Washington to Moscow, examined by independent researchers, and confirmed by the nations whose aircraft fell before the Eagle's missiles and guns. And Soviet pilots knew it. They knew it in classified briefings held deep within military installations across the Soviet Empire during the 1980s. They knew it when reconnaissance photographs showed the Eagle's distinctive twin tails and swept wings. They knew it in their bones when instructors showed footage of Syrian MiGs exploding under missile impacts that came from aircraft the Syrians never saw. In those briefings, fighter pilots trained from youth to embody aggressive Soviet air power received an order that would have seemed unthinkable just a decade earlier. When encountering American F-15 Eagles, avoid direct engagement whenever possible. If Eagles detected, call for reinforcements before committing. If neither reinforcement nor missile support available, disengage entirely. Only if no other option existed were they authorized to engage, and then only with numerical superiority of at least 3-1. For aviators raised on stories of the Great Patriotic War, where their predecessors battled the Luftwaffe against desperate odds, this directive carried an almost heretical weight. The Soviet Union did not teach its pilots to run, did not train them to hide, did not instruct them to fear any enemy aircraft. Yet here was official doctrine written in classified manuals distributed to every fighter squadron from East Germany to Vladivostok, ordering exactly that: fear the Eagle. But how did one aircraft achieve such mythological status? How did the Eagle transform from blueprints on a drawing board to the most feared fighter jet in human history? The answer begins not with American ingenuity, but with American fear. And that fear was born on a sweltering July day in 1967 at an air show outside Moscow when Western observers witnessed something that would send shockwaves through every defense ministry in the Western Alliance. If you remember the Cold War, if you practiced duck and cover drills or built fallout shelters in your basement, leave a comment below. Your memories matter. They are history. Subscribe now because this story will show you how American fear created the most successful fighter aircraft in history. And it will reveal why sometimes being wrong about the enemy leads to being right about ourselves. Major Richard Thompson sat in the observation stand at Domodedovo Airfield outside Moscow, camera-ready, notebook open, trying not to sweat through his dress uniform in the oppressive July heat. Age 32, Air Force Intelligence. He had flown F-4 Phantoms before transferring to analysis work. He understood aircraft the way some men understood women, instinctively reading performance from the curve of a wing, sensing a capability from the angle of a tail. What he saw that afternoon would haunt him for years. The crowd around him stirred. British officers adjusted binoculars. French analysts checked camera settings. West German observers leaned forward in their seats. Everyone knew something significant was coming. Soviet air shows were carefully choreographed propaganda events. Every aircraft displayed every maneuver performed, every capability demonstrated, served a purpose. And today's purpose, Thompson suspected, was intimidation. The massive interceptor that streaked across the Soviet sky seemed impossibly fast, impossibly large, impossibly threatening. Twin engines trailing thunder that shook the grandstand, swept wings angled back like a predatory bird frozen in mid-dive, climbing at angles that made American aircraft look like they were standing still. The aircraft pulled vertical, accelerating straight up until it disappeared into the summer haze, then reappeared moments later in a diving attack run that had every observer frantically scribbling notes. This was the Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-25, codename Foxbat, by NATO intelligence, and its appearance represented what Thompson and everyone else in that grandstand believed to be a fundamental shift in the balance of air power. The aircraft made 3 more passes, each one demonstrating speed that seemed to violate the laws of physics, each one climbing higher than any Western fighter could reach, each one suggesting capabilities that rendered American air superiority obsolete. Thompson watched through binoculars, his trained eye cataloging every detail. The size suggested massive fuel capacity and extended range. The engines were enormous, producing thrust that must be staggering. The radar nose cone was larger than anything America had fielded. If this aircraft could do what it appeared capable of doing, the implications were terrifying. Back in his hotel room that night, Thompson filed his initial assessment through encrypted channels. His hands shook slightly as he typed on the portable encryption device. The aircraft appeared capable of speeds exceeding Mach 3, service ceiling possibly above 80,000 feet. Size suggested formidable weapons load and internal fuel for extended missions. If projections were accurate, and Thompson saw no reason to doubt his own eyes, the implications were staggering. Soviet bombers equipped with such performance could penetrate American air defenses with impunity. NATO's entire air defense strategy, built on the assumption of American technological superiority, might be obsolete. That evening, Thompson ate dinner at the hotel restaurant with other Western observers. Borscht served in heavy ceramic bowls, steam rising in the air-conditioned room. Black bread with butter, dense and dark. Beef stroganoff that would have been excellent under other circumstances, meat tender sauce, rich with sour cream and mushrooms. But the food tasted like ashes in his mouth. Around him, analysts from Britain, France, and West Germany spoke in hushed tones about what they had witnessed. The consensus was terrifying and unanimous. Soviet aviation technology had leaped ahead of Western counterparts. American air superiority, the foundation of NATO strategy in Europe, seemed suddenly vulnerable. Thompson barely touched his meal. He pushed stroganoff around his plate with a fork, watching the sauce congeal as it cooled. His appetite had vanished the moment that MiG roared overhead at speeds no American aircraft could match. He thought about his wife back in Virginia, about his two daughters ages 6 and 4. If this Soviet superfighter was real, if American bombers and fighters were truly obsolete, what happened to deterrence? What happened to the nuclear balance that kept his family safe? What happened when the enemy could strike with impunity and America could not respond? The British officer sitting next to him, a wing commander named Peters with 20 years in RAF intelligence, leaned close and spoke quietly. "Richard, what you're thinking right now, we're all thinking it. That thing changes everything. Question is, what do we do about it?" Thompson looked at his cold stroganoff, at the bread he had not touched, at the vodka he had poured but not drunk. "We build something better," he said finally. "We always have. We always will." But even as he spoke the words, Thompson wondered if he believed them. American aircraft development took years, sometimes a decade. If the Soviets had achieved such a leap in capability, how long before America could respond? And what happened in the years between 2,000 miles east, in a classified facility outside Moscow? The engineer who designed the MiG-25's engines sat in his small apartment, eating the same black bread Thompson had consumed at the hotel. Konstantin Petrov, age 48, senior designer at the Tumansky Design Bureau. But unlike Thompson, Petrov was smiling as he chewed his bread and sipped weak tea from a glass holder. The Americans were terrified. Excellent. Let them be terrified. Let them spend billions of rubles or dollars as they counted their money responding to a threat that was not quite what it appeared to be. The MiG-25 was indeed faster than any operational fighter in the world. But Petrov knew what the Americans did not. The aircraft was a specialized interceptor, not an air superiority fighter. Its mission was climbing rapidly to extreme altitude, accelerating to maximum speed, launching missiles at American bombers, then returning to base before fuel exhausted. In maneuvering combat against other fighters, the MiG-25 would be at severe disadvantage. Its massive engines consumed fuel at rates that limited practical range severely. In a turning fight, its large size and high wing loading made it sluggish, unable to match more agile opponents. At high speed, pulling tight turns would cause structural failure, the wings literally tearing from the fuselage. The aircraft was optimized for one specific mission, and that mission was not dogfighting. But the Americans did not know that yet. They saw the impressive air show display and assumed capability across all mission profiles. Their fear would drive them to create something Petrov knew his country could not match. Something more versatile, more capable, more deadly than the specialized interceptor that had caused such alarm. Petrov finished his tea, looked out his apartment window at the Moscow skyline. Somewhere in America, engineers were already beginning to respond to the challenge his aircraft represented. And they would succeed. He was certain of that. The Americans always succeeded when properly motivated. Their system, for all its capitalist chaos and democratic inefficiency, produced remarkable results when focused on a clear threat. Fear Petrov thought spreading butter on another piece of black bread was sometimes the most effective weapon of all. 3 months later, September 1967, The Pentagon in Washington, D.C. hummed with controlled panic. Colonel Frank Morrison had not slept properly in weeks, age 51, 2 decades in fighter aviation. He commanded the Pentagon's Fighter Requirements Division, a position that sounded bureaucratic, but was actually one of the most critical in the Air Force. His job was ensuring American pilots had the best aircraft in the world. The MiG-25's appearance made that job suddenly terrifyingly uncertain. The emergency meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock at night after regular staff had gone home. Morrison gathered 6 senior officers in the Pentagon cafeteria of all places, pushing tables together to create makeshift conference space. The cafeteria was deserted at this hour, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the smell of old coffee and industrial cleaner permeating the air. Morrison had brought terrible coffee from vending machines, bitter and weak simultaneously, a feat of bad engineering. Someone had found stale donuts in a break room, probably left over from morning meetings. The food was awful, the coffee worse, but nobody noticed or cared. They had bigger problems than bad refreshments. General Curtis Bradley, Strategic Air Command, stirred his coffee with a plastic spoon and held the floor. Age 56. World War II veteran who had flown B-17s over Germany before moving into strategic planning. A man of absolute certainty, comfortable assumptions, and unwavering confidence in American superiority. "Gentlemen," Bradley said, his voice carrying command authority even in a cafeteria at night, "I've reviewed the intelligence reports from Moscow. The Soviet aircraft is impressive in its performance envelope, but we must maintain perspective. The Soviet Union remains a decade behind us in aircraft technology. This MiG-25 is an anomaly, not a breakthrough. We maintain our advantage through continued advancement, as we always have." Around the table, heads nodded. Agreement seemed universal. American technological superiority was an article of faith, unquestioned dogma, reinforced by 20 years of Cold War competition. Of course, the Soviets could not truly match American engineering. Of course, any apparent advantage was temporary. Of course, America would respond and reassert dominance. Major Thompson, invited to the meeting because of his first-hand observations in Moscow, raised his hand hesitantly. Around him, colonels and generals paused mid-bite of their stale donuts. Junior officers did not interrupt generals in Pentagon meetings, even informal ones held in cafeterias at 10 o'clock at night. "General, respectfully, Soviet industrial capacity has grown significantly since the war. Should we consider the possibility this represents a fundamental leap in their capabilities rather than an anomaly?" Bradley's stare could freeze vodka, his eyes pale blue and cold, fixed on Thompson with the kind of look that ended careers. Major Thompson's Soviet engineers are competent at copying. They copied our B-29 after the war produced a functional replica. They are not, however, capable of fundamental innovation. They do not have the industrial base, the technological sophistication, or the creative culture necessary for breakthrough developments. We will respond to this challenge with superior American engineering, as we always have. Our approach has worked for 2 decades. I see no reason to question it now. Thompson wanted to argue, wanted to point out that underestimating enemies had historically proven catastrophic, wanted to cite examples from Pearl Harbor to Korea, where comfortable assumptions collided with uncomfortable reality. But arguing with generals as a major was career suicide. He returned to his terrible coffee, sipping the bitter liquid, feeling it burn all the way down. He wrote a single word in his notebook margin, pressing the pen hard enough to tear the paper slightly. Hubris. The meeting continued for another hour. Plans were discussed, proposals debated. But the fundamental assumption remained unchanged. American superiority was inevitable. Soviet capabilities were limited, and any challenge could be met with incremental improvement to existing aircraft designs. The F-4 Phantom, America's frontline fighter, would be upgraded with better radar and more powerful engines. The next-generation fighter, already in conceptual development, would be refined and accelerated. Business as usual with slightly increased urgency. What none of them knew yet, what Thompson suspected but could not prove, was that the F-4 Phantom was already struggling in Vietnam skies. Pilots were discovering that sophisticated electronics could not compensate for fundamental design compromises. The Phantom had been designed as a multi-purpose platform capable of ground attack, reconnaissance, and air combat. The Navy had wanted a fleet defense interceptor. The Air Force had wanted a tactical fighter plane. The result was an aircraft that could perform many missions, but excelled at none of them. And now it faced potential obsolescence from an enemy that seemed to have specialized perfectly. The MiG-25 was not trying to be all things to all services. It was an interceptor, pure and simple, optimized completely for its single mission. And in that mission, it appeared unbeatable. The solution, Thompson thought as he drank his awful coffee and ate his stale donut, would require a complete reimagining of what a fighter aircraft could be. Not multi-purpose compromise, not designed by committee trying to satisfy competing requirements, but single-minded focus on one mission, killing other aircraft. Everything else would be sacrificed to that altar of specialization. But convincing the Pentagon bureaucracy of that necessity would require more than one major's observations and opinions. It would require official programs, competitive contracts, and political will. That process was about to begin. Within weeks of the Moscow Air Show, official directive was issued, establishing the Fighter Experimental Program, designated FX in Pentagon shorthand. The requirements document was demanding to the point of seeming contradictory, almost impossible. The new aircraft needed to be fast enough to intercept the Foxbat at any altitude. It needed to be maneuverable enough to win in close combat against the most agile opponents. It required sufficient range and endurance for extended operations deep into contested airspace. Its systems needed to be sophisticated enough to detect and engage multiple targets simultaneously while remaining reliable enough for frontline service under combat conditions. Most importantly, critically urgently, it needed to arrive before the Soviets could field even more advanced designs. America could not afford another decade of perceived inferiority. The program had to succeed quickly, and had to succeed completely. Defense contractors across America received the requirements document and began preliminary design work. McDonnell Douglas, the company that had built a successful Phantom despite its compromises. Fairchild Republic, maker of the tough A-10 ground attack aircraft. North American Rockwell, builder of the legendary P-51 Mustang a generation earlier. Each submitted proposals reflecting different philosophies about what the next generation of air superiority should look like. The competition was fierce, the stakes enormous, the national security implications clear. This was not just another aircraft development program. This was America's response to an existential threat, real or perceived. The winner would define the future of American air power for decades. The contract was awarded to McDonnell Douglas in December 1969, and Robert Mitchell's life changed forever that Friday afternoon. Robert Mitchell was 44 years old when the call came. Chief engineer at McDonnell Douglas, 20 years designing aircraft. He had worked on the Phantom program, knew its compromises, intimately understood exactly what needed changing for the next generation. His office was on the third floor of the engineering building, windows overlooking the California coast desk covered with blueprints and technical manuals and coffee cups that had long since gone cold. His secretary, Mrs. Patterson, age 58, who had worked for McDonnell Douglas since before the war, appeared in his doorway at 3 in the afternoon. Her face showed nothing, but Mitchell knew her well enough to read the tension in her shoulders. "Mr. Mitchell, Mr. Sanford would like to see you immediately." Mitchell stood, straightened his tie, grabbed a notepad out of habit. He walked through corridors lined with photographs of aircraft his company had built. Sky Raiders and Skyhawks. Phantoms in various configurations. Experimental designs that had never left the drawing board. Each photograph represented years of effort, thousands of engineering hours, millions of dollars in development costs. Company President Sanford's office occupied the top floor corner windows on 2 walls providing panoramic views. Sanford, age 62, stood when Mitchell entered, extended his hand across the massive mahogany desk. "Bob, congratulations. We won the FX contract. You're going to build the next generation of American air superiority fighter. Don't screw it up." Mitchell shook his hand, managed to smile, but inside his mind was already calculating the cost. Not in dollars or engineering hours, in time, in life, in family. This project would consume years of his existence, would demand sacrifices he could barely imagine, would change him in ways he did not yet understand. "Thank you, sir. We won't let you down." "I know you won't, Bob. That's why you're running the program. Take the rest of the day off. Spend time with your family. Starting Monday, you won't see much of them for a while." Mitchell left the office, drove home through California traffic, arrived at his house in the suburbs at 5 o'clock. His wife, Ellen, was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Pot roast, his daughter Sarah's favorite since childhood. Mashed potatoes with gravy. Green beans from their garden. Birthday cake with 16 candles waiting on the counter. Yellow cake with chocolate frosting that Sarah had requested specifically. Tonight was Sarah's 16th birthday dinner. Ellen had been planning it for weeks. The entire family was supposed to gather at 6 o'clock. Robert's parents were driving up from San Diego. Ellen's sister was bringing her family. 16 people total celebration of Sarah's milestone important family event that had been marked on the calendar for months. Robert stood in the kitchen doorway watching his wife work. Ellen, age 46, still beautiful, despite the gray in her hair and the lines around her eyes. She moved with practiced efficiency, checking the roast, stirring the gravy, adjusting the oven temperature. The kitchen smelled like home, like family, like everything worth protecting. The phone rang. Robert answered. Mitchell. His voice was automatic, professional. Bob, it's Patterson. Mr. Sanford needs you back at the office immediately. Emergency meeting about the FX program. Pentagon wants preliminary design review by Monday morning. Robert looked at the pot roast, at the birthday cake, at his wife who had stopped stirring and was watching him with eyes that already knew what he would say. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up. Ellen said nothing, just returned to stirring gravy with mechanical precision, her back to him, shoulders rigid. Ellen, I'm sorry. Emergency meeting. The contract came through and Pentagon wants immediate briefing. I'll be home as soon as I can. Silence. Just the sound of spoon against pot. Circular motion. Steady rhythm. She did not turn around. Ellen, please, this is important. She stopped stirring, set the spoon down carefully, turned to face him. Her eyes were dry but hard, carrying disappointment that cut deeper than tears. Everything is always important, Robert. The project is important. The contract is important. The briefing is important. The only thing that's never quite important enough is us. That's not fair. Fair Sarah has been looking forward to this dinner for weeks. She specifically asked that you be here. Not working late, not at the office. Here, with your family, for one single evening. But apparently that's too much to ask. Ellen, I just found out about this contract. I didn't plan for an emergency meeting, but this project could save American lives, could protect our children, could prevent war. And attending your daughter's birthday dinner could prevent her from growing up believing her father values aircraft more than he values her. Robert grabbed his jacket, checked his watch. He was already late for the meeting. Tell Sarah I'm sorry. Tell her I love her. Tell her I'll make it up to her. You always say that. You never do. Robert left, drove back to the office, arrived to find a dozen senior engineers already gathering in the conference room. Coffee brewing, sandwiches ordered from a nearby deli, blueprints spreading across tables. The work was beginning. The project that would consume the next 3 years of his life, that would miss hundreds more family dinners, that would slowly erode his marriage until it collapsed entirely, was underway. At home, Ellen served pot roast to 16 people, lit 16 candles on chocolate cake, led everyone in singing happy birthday, while Sarah smiled and blew out candles and made a wish that her father would somehow someday care more about being present than being successful. Robert never tasted that pot roast, never saw the birthday cake, never knew that Sarah's wish, whispered over candles before blowing them out, was simple and heartbreaking. I wish Daddy would come home. Years later, long after his marriage had ended, after Sarah had stopped speaking to him entirely, after his son Tommy had learned to expect absence as the default state of fatherhood, Robert would find photographs from that birthday party in a box of possessions Ellen had saved. Pictures of a 16-year-old girl smiling for the camera while her eyes showed hurt her father had caused. Pictures of a mother managing celebration alone while pretending everything was fine. Pictures of a family continuing without the father who had chosen work over presence. But that night, December 1969, Robert Mitchell just worked, gathered his team in the conference room, wrote 4 words on the whiteboard that would define everything to follow, underlining each word for emphasis. Not a pound for air to ground. The room went silent. Every engineer present understood immediately. This aircraft would be optimized purely for air superiority. No ground attack capability, no reconnaissance pods, no multi-purpose compromises that had plagued the Phantom. Every design decision, every system integration, every performance parameter would be evaluated against a single criterion. Could it help the Eagle kill other aircraft? Nothing else mattered, not versatility, not budget constraints, not service rivalries, just lethality and air-to-air combat. The Eagle would be purpose-built for one mission, and it would execute that mission better than any aircraft in history. This single-minded focus would shape everything about the design. The fuselage would be end flat to generate lift, allowing for smaller, more agile wings. The cockpit would sit high for maximum visibility, giving pilots unobstructed views in all directions. The twin-tail configuration would provide stability at high angles of attack while maintaining control effectiveness throughout the flight envelope. Twin engines would offer redundancy and thrust ratios exceeding 1-to-1, allowing the aircraft to accelerate while climbing straight up. Nothing would be superfluous. Everything would serve the mission. But creating such perfection would require sacrifices Mitchell could not yet imagine. Not just missed family dinners, not just absent birthdays and graduations and weddings, but fundamental transformation of who he was as a person. The work would consume him, change him, remake him into someone his daughter would not recognize and his wife could not love. The trade was already made, though he did not know it yet. The Eagle would fly, but Mitchell's family would fall apart. American air superiority would be secured, but his children would grow up without a father present in their lives. National security would be preserved, but personal happiness would be sacrificed. Some men build aircraft, other men build families. Mitchell would prove that building both simultaneously was impossible. And when forced to choose, he chose the aircraft every time. For 30 months, Robert Mitchell lived at the factory more than his home. His team worked 20-hour days, 7 days a week. Marriages collapsed under the strain. Children grew up without fathers present. Health deteriorated from stress and exhaustion. But the aircraft taking shape in the hangar was unlike anything that had come before. Twin Pratt and Whitney F-100 engines, each producing over 23,000 pounds of thrust, with afterburner engaged. Thrust-to-weight ratio greater than 1-to-1. Combat weights, meaning the F-15 could accelerate while climbing straight up, defying gravity itself. No previous production fighter had achieved such performance. The aircraft could literally point its nose at the sky and keep getting faster, a capability that would prove decisive in countless engagements. The AN/APG-63 radar represented a quantum leap in airborne detection technology, capable of tracking multiple targets simultaneously while operating in look-down, shoot-down mode, allowing it to detect low-flying aircraft against ground, clutter that confused earlier radars. Under ideal conditions, the radar could detect fighter-sized targets at ranges exceeding 100 miles, painting enemies on the pilot's display long before those enemies knew they were being hunted. July 27, 1972, Edwards Air Force Base in California's Mojave Desert. Chief Test Pilot James Crawford, age 38, climbed into the F-15 prototype at dawn. Korea veteran with 20 years flying experimental aircraft. He possessed the kind of calm voice that concealed constant awareness of death's proximity, the professional detachment that allowed test pilots to strap themselves into unproven aircraft and push them to destruction. Robert Mitchell stood on the tarmac watching his creation. 30 months of his life in that aircraft. 30 months of missed dinners and absent birthdays and slow death of his marriage. His daughter Sarah had graduated high school the previous month. He had missed the ceremony testing the radar integration system that same weekend. Ellen had attended alone, took photographs Mitchell would see later, but could not remember being absent from. Crawford's voice came over the radio, steady and professional. Tower Eagle 1 ready for departure. Eagle 1 cleared for takeoff. The twin engines screamed to life sound that shook the ground and made chase planes seem motionless by comparison. The aircraft rolled down the runway, accelerated with authority that defied its size and rotated skyward. The nose tilted up. The wheels left concrete. The Eagle climbed into the California morning sky like it was going home. Mitchell watched through binoculars as the aircraft disappeared into blue distance. His hands were shaking. Not from fear of failure, though that fear was present, but from sudden understanding of what he had sacrificed to make this moment real. His marriage was ending. His daughter barely spoke to him. His son Tommy had learned to throw baseball with a neighbor because Dad was never home. The price of this aircraft had been his family, and he could not undo that trade. The F-15 exceeded design specifications in almost every category. It climbed faster than projected, reaching 40,000 feet in under 2 minutes from brake release. It turned harder than requirements demanded, pulling sustained 9G turns that would cause lesser aircraft to shed their wings. Crawford described its handling as exquisite, the aircraft responding instantly to control inputs throughout the flight envelope, as if reading the pilot's mind. When Crawford landed 90 minutes later and climbed from the cockpit, he walked directly to Mitchell, extended his hand, smiled. "Bob, you built something special. This aircraft is going to change everything." Mitchell shook his hand, managed to smile back, but inside a question was forming that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Was it worth what it cost? The F-15 entered operational service with the United States Air Force in January 1976. American pilots finally had a weapon worthy of their training and determination. But the aircraft's true test would not come in Nevada desert or California sky. It would come over the unforgiving terrain of the Middle East, where combat was not simulation and mistakes meant death. June 1979, Ramon Air Base, Southern Israel. Major David Goldstein was 28 years old when the first F-15s arrived in Israeli colors. Hawk to his squadron mates, a call sign earned during the Yom Kippur War when he flew Mirage 30s at age 19. He had achieved 3 kills against Syrian MiG-21s during that desperate conflict, had been shot down once ejected over the Golan Heights, spent 6 hours hiding from Syrian search parties before Sayeret Matkal commandos found him. David knew combat intimately, knew the chaos of maneuvering fights where enemy and friend became tangled in a furball of turning aircraft, knew the split-second decisions between firing and waiting, between braking hard and maintaining pursuit, knew the bitter metallic taste of fear mixed with adrenaline, knew the sweet relief of survival when other men died. When he climbed into the F-15's cockpit for his first training flight, he found himself in possession of capabilities that transformed his understanding of what was possible in aerial warfare. The radar could see targets his Mirage never detected until visual range. The engines provided power that made his previous aircraft feel like flying a truck by comparison. The weapon systems integrated seamlessly, allowing him to transition between beyond visual range missiles and close-range weapons with minimal cognitive load. This was not just a better aircraft. This was a different category of fighting machine entirely. 3 years later, June 1982, Friday evening before Operation Peace for Galilee would begin, David sat at the table in his small apartment near the base. His wife, Rachel, aged 29, moved around their kitchen, lighting Shabbat candles with practiced grace. Their daughter, Sarah, aged 7, watched with solemn eyes, already learning the rituals that had sustained their people through millennia. Their son, Avi, age 4, fidgeted in his chair, too young to understand the significance, but knowing something important was happening. Rachel had prepared the meal with extra care tonight. Chicken soup with fluffy matzah balls that floated like clouds, the broth golden and fragrant with dill. Roasted chicken with potatoes and carrots, the skin crispy and perfectly seasoned. Fresh challah bread still warm from the oven, the braided loaf's crust golden brown interior, soft and perfect for soaking in soup. For dessert, honey cake her daughter had helped bake that afternoon, the apartment still carrying its sweet cinnamon scent. David lifted the kiddush cup, blessed the wine, tore the challah, and distributed pieces to his family. The rituals were ancient, unchanged for thousands of years, connecting this moment to every Shabbat his ancestors had observed. But tonight the rituals felt heavier, more significant. Tomorrow operation would begin. He would fly into Lebanon, face Syrian fighters equipped with the latest Soviet aircraft. Come home or not come home. The choice might not be his. He watched his wife serve soup with careful attention, watched his daughter break bread with small hands, watched his son's enthusiasm for honey cake, oblivious to tomorrow's danger. Tried to memorize these moments, store them against the possibility he might not see them again. Every detail mattered. The way candlelight reflected in Rachel's dark eyes, the sound of Sarah humming a song from school, the feel of warm bread in his hands, the taste of his wife's perfect chicken soup. "Daddy," Sarah asked between spoonfuls of soup, "why do you have to go to work tomorrow?" "It is Shabbat." David looked at Rachel. She looked away, stirring her soup with methodical precision, unable to meet his eyes. "Because Metek," he used the Hebrew endearment, "there are people who want to hurt us, and someone has to keep them away, so you can grow up safe and happy. But what if they hurt you? The question hung in the air. Rachel's spoon stopped moving. Avi paused mid-bite, sensing tension he could not understand. They won't, sweetheart. I have the best airplane in the world. Your papa is the best pilot, and I promised Mama I would always come home. Lies mixed with truth. The F-15 was the best fighter aircraft in the world, that was fact. But being the best did not guarantee survival. Skill and training and superior equipment could not eliminate luck's role in combat. Good pilots died every day, shot down by lesser adversaries who got lucky or made one mistake at the wrong moment, or simply encountered circumstances beyond their control. They ate in silence, punctuated by normal family sounds. Avi asking for more chicken, Sarah humming her school song, Rachel refilling water glasses and making sure everyone had enough. David forced himself to eat, though his stomach was tight with pre-combat tension. The soup tasted perfect, exactly as he remembered from every Shabbat dinner of their marriage. The chicken was tender and flavorful, the challah soft and buttery. He tried to savor every bite, knowing these might be his last tastes of home. After dinner, after the children were in bed, David and Rachel sat on their small balcony. The Israeli night was warm, stars visible despite light pollution from the base. F-15s sat on the flight line below, silhouettes in the darkness, waiting for dawn and war. You have to come back, Rachel said quietly. Not a request, a command, a desperate attempt to control uncontrollable fate through force of will. I will. I promise. You can't promise that. You don't control it. Then I promise to do everything possible to come back. To be smart, to be careful, and to not take unnecessary risks. Rachel took his hand. Her fingers were cold despite the warm night. Those Syrian pilots you'll fight tomorrow, they have wives too. Children who want their fathers to come home. Mothers who pray for their safety. David said nothing. The thought had occurred to him during previous wars. Every enemy pilot he killed had been someone's son, possibly someone's father or husband. War created widows and orphans on both sides. Victory always had human cost. I know, he said finally, but they chose to threaten us. They chose to attack. I'm defending our home, our children. That's the difference. Is there really a difference to the widows left behind? David had no answer. They sat in silence, holding hands, watching stars wheel overhead, each lost in private thoughts about tomorrow and all the tomorrows that might never come. 200 miles north in Damascus, Captain Rashid al-Masri sat at his own family table, eating his own last dinner before war, though neither he nor David Goldstein knew their fates would intersect in less than 72 hours. Rashid, age 28. MiG-23 flogger pilot defending his homeland from invasion he considered unjust. His wife Layla, age 25, had prepared Mansaf traditional Jordanian dish of lamb, cooked in yogurt sauce served over rice. Their son Omar, 6 months old, slept in a cradle near the table, oblivious to adult fears. The lamb was tender, falling from the bone, seasoned with baharat and cinnamon. The yogurt sauce was tangy and rich. The rice perfectly cooked, each grain separate. Layla had spent hours preparing this meal, cooking with extra care the way wives do when they sense danger their husband's face. Rashid ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Tomorrow, Israeli aircraft would penetrate Lebanese airspace. Syrian forces would respond. Engagement was inevitable. His squadron commander had briefed them that afternoon Israeli F-15s would likely be involved. New American aircraft, reputation for lethality. But Syrian pilots were well-trained, flying the latest Soviet equipment. The MiG-23 was specifically designed to counter American fighters. They would prevail. But Rashid had heard rumors from pilots who survived previous encounters with Israeli Eagles. Rumors about missiles appearing from empty sky. About aircraft exploding before pilots knew they were under attack. About technological disparities so vast that skill became irrelevant. He tried to dismiss these rumors as fear and exaggeration. Tried to believe in his training, his aircraft, his mission. But doubt gnawed at confidence's edges. You're not eating, Layla observed, watching her husband push food around his plate. I'm eating. It's delicious. You cooked perfectly? You're thinking about tomorrow. Rashid looked at his son sleeping peacefully. Omar's small face features still forming looked angelic in the soft lamplight. The baby had no idea his father might not return from tomorrow's mission. No comprehension that war was coming, that his future might be shaped by events happening 500 miles west. "I will come back," Rashid said, though he wondered if he believed it. "I will hold our son when he takes his first steps. I will teach him to be a good man. I will grow old with you and watch our grandchildren play. This, I promise." Layla said nothing, just served more rice, more lamb, more yogurt sauce, feeding her husband, performing the ancient ritual of wives preparing warriors for battle. She did not cry. Syrian women learned stoicism, young learned to hide fear behind competent action. But that night, after Rashid finally slept, Layla held her son and whispered prayers she had learned from her grandmother. Prayers for protection, prayers for safe return. Prayers that God, if he existed and if he cared, would bring her husband home from war. God, it seemed, had other plans. June 27th, 1979, the day the Eagle drew first blood. 4 F-15s scrambled from Ramon Air Base at dawn. David Goldstein led the formation, his wingman Lieutenant Aaron Cohen, aged 24, eager for his first combat kill. Behind them, 2 more Eagles flown by veterans who had transitioned from earlier aircraft and understood the revolution this new fighter represented. Syrian MiG-21 fish beds detected over southern Lebanon. 5 aircraft on patrol, Soviet-aligned forces, testing Israeli response, probing defenses, seeing how far they could push before someone pushed back. Today, Israel pushed back with Eagles. Goldstein's radar painted the Syrian formation at 70 miles distance. 5 distinct contacts flying lazy patrol pattern, apparently unaware of approaching threat. The F-15's AN/APG-63 radar could see them clearly tracking their altitude speed heading. But the Syrians' older radars, based on 1960s Soviet technology, could not reciprocate. They flew blind toward enemy they could not detect. "Hawk Flight Hawk 1, Goldstein radioed to his formation. "I have 5 bandits bearing 310 range 65 miles Angels, 20,000. Request weapons free. Hawk 1 weapons free. Engage at your discretion. Good hunting." Goldstein's thumb moved to weapons selector. He chose AM-7 Sparrow radar-guided missile for beyond visual range engagement. The targeting computer calculated intercept solutions, displaying optimal firing parameters on his heads-up display. Every second they flew closer. Every second, the Syrians remained ignorant of death approaching at 600 miles per hour. At 30 miles, well beyond the range where Syrian pilots could detect or engage him, Goldstein launched his first Sparrow. The missile dropped from the F-15's fuselage motor, igniting after a brief fall, accelerating toward the distant target at Mach 4. The missile's onboard seeker received guidance updates from Goldstein's radar, adjusting course to intercept the Syrian aircraft that had no idea it was about to die. The Syrian pilots never saw the missile coming. Their radar warning receivers never activated because the threat was beyond their detection range. Their first knowledge of attack was when their leader's aircraft exploded in a massive fireball, disintegrating in less than a second, spreading burning debris across Lebanese sky. Only then did their primitive systems begin screaming warnings. Only then did they realize they were under attack from an enemy they could not see. The formation split in panic. Desperate, evasive maneuvers. Some Syrian pilots dove toward the deck, attempting to use ground clutter to mask their radar signatures. Others broke hard left or right, trying to force pursuing missiles to turn so sharply they lost tracking. But it was too late. Goldstein's wingmen launched their own Sparrows. Then 3rd and 4th Israeli aircraft followed suit. 4 more explosions in rapid succession. Syrian MiG-21s tumbling from the sky in flames. Pilots ejecting or not ejecting, depending on how much warning they received before impact. 5 minutes from first radar contact, the last Syrian aircraft falling. 5 Syrian pilots dead or captured. 4 Israeli pilots untouched, unmarked their aircraft, still carrying full ammunition loads for cannons they never needed to fire. The engagement had been conducted entirely beyond visual range. Goldstein never saw the men he killed with his own eyes, never witnessed their faces or heard their final radio transmissions. They were simply radar returns that appeared where engaged and disappeared. Clinical, distant, absolute. Many of you watching this flew aircraft during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, either military or commercial. You understand what these engineers and pilots accomplished. The precision required, the courage to test unproven technology and take it into combat. That was your generation's contribution to history. If you or family members worked in aviation during this era, share your stories in the comments below. These memories matter. They are part of American history, part of world history, and we want to preserve them before they are lost. Goldstein landed at Ramon Air Base 2 hours later, shut down engines, sat in the cockpit for a long moment before climbing out, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. He had just killed men who never saw him, never had a chance to defend themselves, never knew enemy was there until missiles destroyed their aircraft. It was not combat as he had known it in previous wars. Not maneuvering dogfight where skill determined outcome. This was execution, long-range, clinical, unstoppable. The squadron gathered that evening in the base cantina for an informal gathering. Someone brought bottles of wine. Another contributed grilled lamb and pita bread, traditional Israeli military celebration food. Not formal ceremony, just pilots decompressing after combat processing. What they had done, what they had survived, what this new aircraft made possible. Goldstein sat at a corner table, eating mechanically. The lamb tasted like nothing despite being perfectly cooked. Wine did not ease the tension in his shoulders or the questions forming in his mind. Around him, younger pilots were animated, excited. Aaron Cohen especially flushed with his first kill, talking rapidly about the engagement, replaying every moment. "Hawk, we did good today, yes." Cohen sat down with 2 fresh glasses of wine. 5 kills, 0 losses. The Eagle is everything they promised. Goldstein looked at his wingman, 24 years old, barely older than Goldstein had been during the Yom Kippur War. Still believed combat was glory, still thought killing was achievement, had not yet learned that necessary and right were not the same as good. "Yes, Aaron, we did good. 5 Syrian pilots will not threaten Israeli citizens tonight. 5 Syrian aircraft will not carry bombs over our cities. We accomplished our mission." But Cohen heard the unspoken word. But 5 Syrian mothers just learned their sons are dead. 5 Syrian children just lost fathers, possibly. 5 families just had their worlds destroyed. And those men never had a chance. Never saw us coming. Never could have defended themselves even if they had. That's the point, superior technology. Superior training. We win without losing our own people. Goldstein sipped his wine. It tasted simultaneously like victory and ashes. "Yes, Aaron, that's exactly the point. We have created a weapon so superior that combat becomes execution. The question is whether that makes us safer or just makes us efficient killers." Cohen had no answer. Neither did Goldstein. They drank their wine in silence, surrounded by celebrating pilots, each thinking private thoughts about the men they had killed and the families those men left behind. In Damascus that same evening, Layla al-Masri fed baby Omar his evening bottle while waiting for her husband to call. He had promised to call after landing after his patrol mission over Lebanon concluded safely. Hours passed, no call came. She told herself debriefing maintenance issues, communication problems. 100 innocent explanations why military pilots might not call wives immediately after missions. But wives know. Some instinct deeper than logic. Some awareness that cannot be rationally explained. Layla knew before the official car arrived at her apartment building. Knew before the officer knocked on her door. Knew before words were spoken that would change her world forever. Captain Rashid al-Masri, age 28, MiG-21 pilot, dead over Lebanon, shot down by Israeli aircraft. Exact circumstances unknown. Body not recovered. No remains to bury according to proper Islamic tradition. Just gone. Erased from earth. Transformed from husband and father into memory and absence. Layla did not scream, did not collapse. Syrian women learned stoicism young. She just held baby Omar closer, feeling his small, warm body against hers, breathing in his baby smell, thinking about the future that had just evaporated. Her husband would never see this child walk, never hear first words, never teach him to be a man. Omar would grow up without a father, one more casualty of wars that men started and families endured. What Layla did not know, what she would never learn, was that her husband had been David Goldstein's first kill. The distant radar return. The anonymous target. The fireball that appeared and disappeared in seconds. That had been Rashid, had been the father of her child, had been the man who promised to come home. War is not just victories and defeats measured in aircraft destroyed and missions accomplished. War is widows holding babies, orphans growing up without fathers, families shattered by decisions made in distant capitals by men who never faced the human cost of their policies. David Goldstein killed Rashid al-Masri from 30 miles distance without ever seeing his face. And Layla would raise Omar alone, one more Syrian widow among thousands, her husband transformed into a statistic in casualty reports. This human cost, this personal tragedy multiplied by thousands would haunt Goldstein for the rest of his life. But that understanding was still in the future. For now, in June 1979, there were only more missions, more targets, more distant explosions representing lives ended. The Eagle had drawn first blood, and the killing had only just begun. 3 years later, June 1982, the slaughter would reach its apex in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, where the F-15 would prove what it could do when unleashed without restraint. June 10, 1982, the second day of Operation Peace for Galilee. Israeli ground forces pushed deeper into Lebanon, while Syrian Air Force committed its best equipment to contest the skies. MiG-23 floggers, the latest Soviet export fighters with variable geometry, wings, and beyond visual range capability, formed the backbone of Syria's response. On paper, these aircraft should have been competitive with the F-15. In practice, the result was massacre. David Goldstein, now aged 32, led his squadron into combat over the Bekaa Valley. The morning briefing had been somber. Intelligence indicated Syrian forces were massing aircraft preparing for major air battle. Israeli pilots expected heavy resistance. What they did not expect was how utterly one-sided the engagements would become. 8 Syrian MiG-23s detected at 70 miles flying in tight formation toward Israeli positions. Goldstein's flight of 4 Eagles climbed to optimal altitude, remaining outside Syrian radar detection range. At that altitude and distance against the morning sun, they were invisible ghosts. The Syrians had no idea death was stalking them from above. Hawk flight, I have 8 bandits bearing 2 9er range 6-8 Angels, 1-8. Engage at will. At 30 miles well beyond the range where Syrian aircraft could detect or engage them, the Israeli pilots launched their Sparrows. 4 missiles streaking through clear morning sky toward enemies who had no warning, no chance, no hope. The Syrian formation exploded. The first aircraft simply vanished in a massive fireball, there one moment gone the next. Remaining pilots saw the explosion, understood they were under attack, began desperate evasive maneuvers. But their radar still showed nothing. The enemy was invisible. They were dodging, blind maneuvering against a threat they could not locate, fighting an adversary who could see them perfectly while remaining unseen. Second missile impact. Third, fourth. Syrian MiG-23s tumbling from sky, trailing smoke and flame. Some pilots ejected successfully, parachutes blossoming white against blue sky. Others never had the chance, their aircraft disintegrating too quickly for escape. The remaining 4 Syrian pilots broke formation and fled toward Damascus at maximum speed, their radio transmissions frantic with panic. We are under attack, cannot see them. Missiles from nowhere request immediate assistance. But no assistance came. Syrian ground controllers had nothing to offer. Their own radar systems could not track Israeli Eagles operating at those altitudes and ranges with electronic countermeasures active. They could only listen helplessly as their pilots died or fled, the systematic destruction of their air force playing out in real time over radio frequencies. Over 3 days of intense combat from June 9th to June 11th, the pattern repeated with numbing consistency. Syrian aircraft detected at long range. Israeli Eagles maneuvering to optimal attack positions while remaining undetected. Missiles launched from beyond visual range. Syrian aircraft exploding or fleeing. The tally mounted with horrifying speed. 80 Syrian aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat over 3 days. The F-15 alone accounted for more than 40 kills. Israeli losses in air-to-air combat, 0. The numbers were almost absurd in their one-sidedness, so lopsided they seemed like propaganda rather than documented fact. But they were real, verified by multiple sources, acknowledged even by Syrian commanders in classified post-battle assessments. The Israeli Air Force, equipped with American F-15s and F-16s, had achieved air superiority so complete that Syrian forces essentially ceased flying offensive missions. Pilots who survived refused to fly when Eagles were reported in the area. Ground commanders began pulling aircraft from forward bases rather than risk their destruction. In Moscow, Soviet military analysts studied the carnage with growing alarm. The MiG-23 Flogger had been designed specifically to counter the F-4 Phantom generation of American fighters. It featured variable geometry wings for optimal performance across speed ranges. It mounted sophisticated radar with beyond visual range capability. It carried the latest Soviet air-to-air missiles. On paper and simulations and test flights against older aircraft, the Flogger had performed well. Against the F-15 Eagle in actual combat, it was helpless. Colonel Mikhail Petrov, age 48, Soviet Air Force analyst responsible for tactical fighter doctrine, sat in a classified briefing room in the Ministry of Defense, studying after action reports from Syrian allies. The documents made for grim reading. Engagement after engagement followed the same pattern. Syrian formations detected and destroyed before they could respond. Syrian pilots never seeing attackers. Syrian ground controllers unable to provide warning or assistance. Complete technological dominance translating into absolute tactical superiority. Petrov drafted his report with careful attention to political sensitivities. Criticizing Soviet equipment too harshly could end his career. But failing to acknowledge reality could cost lives if war ever came to Central Europe. He chose accuracy over safety. Analysis of Israeli operations over Lebanon demonstrates fundamental inadequacy of current Soviet fighter doctrine when facing F-15 Eagle aircraft. Enemy possesses detection capabilities beyond our countermeasures. Enemy missiles achieve superior range and reliability compared to our systems. Enemy pilots maintain situational awareness through advanced avionics integration we cannot currently match. Most critically, enemy willingness to engage beyond visual range eliminates theoretical advantages or parameters our aircraft possess in close combat maneuvering. He paused, considering his next words carefully. This was the paragraph that might end his career, but it was also the truth that might save Soviet pilots' lives. Recommendation: direct engagement with F-15 Eagles should be avoided whenever tactically possible. Pilots encountering Eagles should request reinforcement before committing to combat. Should attempt to maneuver enemy aircraft into SAM engagement zones, where ground-based systems can provide support. Only if no alternatives exist should direct engagement be authorized, and then only with confirmed numerical superiority of minimum 3-to-1 ratio. Petrov signed the report, submitted it through official channels, waited for the response that would determine whether he had a future in the Soviet Air Force or would be reassigned to some remote posting where his career would quietly die. The response came 2 weeks later. His recommendations were approved, distributed to Warsaw Pact air forces, incorporated into official tactical doctrine. Soviet fighter pilots from East Germany to Vladivostok would receive briefings instructing them to avoid engaging F-15 Eagles whenever possible. The psychological impact was devastating. Kubinka Air Base outside Moscow. October 1985, 3 years after the Baikal Valley slaughter. Lieutenant Alexei Volkov, age 23, fresh from flight school, sat with his squadron in the classified briefing room. He had been assigned to a MiG-29 Fulcrum squadron, the latest Soviet fighter designed specifically to match American F-15 and F-16 capabilities. Advanced engines providing excellent thrust-to-weight ratio. Sophisticated radar with look-down, shoot-down capability. Helmet-mounted sight for improved targeting. On paper, the Fulcrum was everything Soviet aviation had promised a Western equivalent fighter that could compete on equal terms. The senior instructor, amazed with combat experience in Afghanistan, stood before a wall chart showing F-15 Eagle silhouette. This is the American F-15 Eagle. You will now watch footage obtained from our Syrian comrades. The lights dimmed. Grainy video appeared on screen. Gun camera footage from Israeli aircraft showing missile impacts. Syrian MiG-23s exploding in fireballs. Aircraft spinning toward Earth trailing smoke. Pilots ejecting or not ejecting depending on warning received. Impact after impact. Explosion after explosion. The clinical documentation of slaughter. Alexei felt cold spreading through his chest despite the overheated room. He had joined the VVS believing Soviet aircraft were equal or superior to Western counterparts. Had been told American technological advantage was capitalist propaganda designed to justify military spending. But the evidence before his eyes told a different story. Syrian pilots flying aircraft similar to what he might face in combat were being systematically destroyed by an enemy they never saw. If you encounter F-15 Eagles in combat, the instructor continued, his voice flat and emotionless, Standard doctrine is to avoid direct engagement. You will call for reinforcements. You will attempt to draw the enemy into SAM coverage zones. You will only engage if no alternative exists and only with numerical advantage of minimum 3-1. A hand raised in the back, junior lieutenant, approximately Alexei's age. Comrade Major, what if we cannot avoid engagement? What if reinforcements are not available and we are forced to fight? The instructor looked at the young pilot with eyes that had seen too much combat, too many friends die, too many confident young men transformed into statistics. Then, Lieutenant, you eject before they kill you. You preserve yourself to fight another day when conditions favor you. But you do not fight F-15 one-on-one if you want to see your family again. Do you understand, Shipbat? Silence filled the briefing room. Every young pilot present absorbed the message. The Soviet Union, which had defeated Nazi Germany through courage and sacrifice, which built hydrogen bombs and launched satellites, which claimed technological parity with the West, was officially instructing its fighter pilots to run from American aircraft, to hide, to avoid combat, to accept that in head-to-head engagement they would lose. Alexei would remember this briefing for the rest of his life, would remember the cold spreading through his chest, would remember the instructor's dead eyes and flat voice, would remember the feeling of pride transforming into doubt, confidence eroding into fear. Years later, after the Soviet Union collapsed and he could speak freely, he would tell Western journalists, that briefing destroyed morale more than any tactical defeat. Knowing our best equipment could not match their best equipment, knowing we would lose head-to-head, that our only hope was to hide and pray they did not find us. That is not how you build an air force. That is how you build fear. But to understand the full irony of this story, we must return to September 1976. 6 years before the Bekaa Valley, 15 years before the Gulf War, to the defection that revealed the MiG-25 Foxbat's true nature and exposed the miscalculation at the heart of the F-15 program. Viktor Sokolov, age 35, Soviet MiG-25 pilot, landed at Hakodate Airport in Japan on September 6, 1976. His defection became an intelligence coup of the highest order, providing the West with detailed access to the aircraft that had caused so much alarm nearly a decade earlier. American analysts warned the captured Foxbat finally had opportunity to examine in detail the interceptor that had sparked the F-15 program. What they discovered was sobering, but not in the way they had expected. The MiG-25 was indeed fast, capable of reaching Mach 2.8 in short bursts, but its capabilities had been significantly overestimated by Western intelligence. The massive engines designed for straight-line speed consume fuel at prodigious rates, limiting practical range severely. In maneuvering combat, the aircraft was relatively sluggish. Its large size and high wing loading made it unsuitable for the kind of close combat that characterized most aerial engagements. At high speed, pulling tight turns would cause structural failure, the wings literally failing under G-forces. The radar was powerful in raw output, but based on vacuum tube technology rather than solid-state components used in American systems. This made it heavy, less reliable, less capable of the sophisticated signal processing that F-15's radar performed routinely. The aircraft was designed as an interceptor to shoot down American bombers at high altitude, not as an air superiority fighter to engage other fighters in maneuvering combat. The CIA arranged Sokolov's debriefing at a secure facility in California. For 3 months, analysts questioned him about every aspect of Soviet aviation. His first meal as a free man was simple: hamburger, French fries, Coca-Cola, standard American fare. But after years of Soviet canteens serving thin soup and tough meat, it tasted like revelation. The hamburger was thick and juicy, cooked medium rare the way he requested. Real cheese melted over beef, fresh lettuce and ripe tomato, soft bun. He bit into it and tasted abundance, tasted freedom, tasted everything Soviet propaganda claimed Americans lacked. The fries were crispy and salted perfectly. The Coca-Cola sweet and cold. Simple meal, but it represented everything he had risked his life to reach. His CIA handler, a man named Williams who spoke adequate Russian, watched him eat with professional detachment. Mr. Sokolov, your defection has provided valuable intelligence. The MiG-25 was not the threat we estimated it to be, but irony is our response to that perceived threat created an aircraft that truly is dominant. The F-15 Eagle exceeds anything your country can currently field. Sokolov chewed his hamburger thoughtfully, swallowed, sipped his Coca-Cola, the bubbles sharp and pleasant. I know, that is partly why I am here. I flew the MiG-25. It is a good interceptor for its designed mission. But I also read classified analyses of Israeli combat operations. I saw reports of Syrian aircraft being destroyed at rates approaching 100%. The F-15 is not just a better aircraft. It represents a generational leap in capability. Soviet fighters facing Eagles are like infantry facing tanks. The outcome is predetermined before battle begins. The threat that spawned the F-15 program had been fundamentally misunderstood. The MiG-25 Foxbat was not the super fighter American intelligence feared. But that misunderstanding had created something extraordinary. American engineers had built an aircraft to counter the Foxbat's perceived capabilities. When the Foxbat proved less threatening than estimated, the F-15 was already operational and exceeded the original threat in every category. Fear had created perfection. Being wrong about the enemy had led to being exactly right about what America needed. January 1991, 15 years after Sokolov's defection. The F-15 would face its ultimate test in the skies over Iraq. Captain Michael Hayes, age 29, F-15C pilot and assigned to the 58th Tactical Fighter Squadron, sat in the pre-flight briefing room at a Saudi airbase 2 days before Operation Desert Storm began. Around him, 30 pilots received mission details for the air campaign about to commence. Iraqi Air Force operated over 700 combat aircraft, including MiG-29 Fulcrums, the latest Soviet technology, and Mirage F-1s purchased from France. 2 days before the air war started, Hayes and 3 squadron mates drove to a diner they had discovered outside Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada during training. Dorothy Martinez, age 58, owned the place. She had served breakfast to 3 generations of military pilots, knew how to read the tension in young men's faces, understood what it meant when pilots ordered extra bacon before deploying overseas. Hayes ordered his usual, eggs over easy yolks, still runny. Bacon cooked crispy, 6 strips instead of the usual 4, hash browns with onions, wheat toast with strawberry jam, coffee strong enough to strip paint black with no sugar. Dorothy served them, personally refilling coffee cups without being asked, making sure they had everything they needed. "You boys be careful over there," she said, her voice carrying a maternal concern earned through decades of watching young men go to war. "Come back safe so you can eat my bacon again." Hayes smiled, trying to project confidence he mostly felt. "We'll be fine, ma'am. We have the best aircraft in the world. We're the best pilots. Those Iraqi pilots have no idea what they're facing." Not arrogance, just statement of fact backed by 15 years of combat history. The F-15 had never lost an air-to-air engagement. Iraqi Air Force flew aircraft the Eagle had already defeated in other conflicts. Training, equipment, tactics, everything favored the Americans overwhelmingly. Dorothy looked at these young boys, really despite their flight suits and confidence. They reminded her of her son, who had served in Vietnam, reminded her of her husband, who had flown B-17s over Germany. Every generation sent its children to war. Every generation prayed they came home. "I believe you," she said quietly, "but I'll pray anyway, just in case God's paying attention." The bacon tasted perfect that morning. Crispy and salty and exactly right. Hayes would remember that taste weeks later when the war ended and he returned to Dorothy's diner to find she had framed a photograph of him and his squadron mates from that breakfast, hanging it in a place of honor on the wall. She would refuse to charge veterans for breakfast from that day forward. "You paid," she would say when they protested, "in ways I can't imagine. Breakfast is on me." January 29, 1991. 10 days into Operation Desert Storm. Captain Hayes flew combat air patrol over western Iraq at 35,000 feet. Desert stretched below, brown and endless, under clear sky. Perfect hunting conditions. His radar detected a low-flying contact moving fast using terrain masking to avoid detection. Hayes descended to investigate his wingman following in tactical formation. The contact resolved into an Iraqi IL-76 candid transport, a large 4-engine jet attempting to flee to Iran to escape destruction. Following rules of engagement requiring positive identification before attack, Hayes verified the target visually through his canopy. Large transport aircraft, Iraqi markings, flying toward Iranian border at low altitude and high speed. Valid military target attempting to escape. He selected AIM-7 Sparrow. Locked the target, waited for optimal firing solution. Launched. The massive transport exploded in a fireball visible for 30 miles, debris raining down across the desert. One of the largest aircraft ever destroyed in air-to-air combat. Even an enormous target could not escape the Eagle's reach. Minutes later, as Hayes orbited the area documenting the kill, his radar detected 2 additional contacts approaching at low altitude. Iraqi MiG-23 floggers apparently investigating the explosion. Unaware American fighters lurked above. Hayes and his wingman maneuvered to intercept with the calm precision of men who had practiced these tactics thousands of times. The Iraqi pilots focused on searching for the transport, never detected the threat above them. Within seconds, both MiGs were destroyed by Moss AIM-9 Sidewinder heat-seeking missiles. 3 Iraqi aircraft destroyed in under 3 minutes. Hayes had never been in danger at any point. He returned to base to refuel and rearm, ready for the next sortie, another routine mission in a war that was proving to be utterly one-sided. Coalition pilots led by American F-15 crews would claim 34 aerial victories during the Gulf War. The F-15 alone accounted for 34 confirmed kills. Iraqi pilots, despite flying modern aircraft and defending their homeland, proved unable to score a single victory against the Eagles. 0. Not one. By mid-campaign, Iraqi pilots stopped showing up for missions. Squadron commanders found their aviators developing mysterious illnesses when operations against American aircraft were ordered. Many Iraqi aircraft were flown to Iran rather than face destruction, an ironic fate given the bitter 8-year war those countries had just concluded. The Iraqi Air Force effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force, destroyed on the ground, fled to neighboring countries, or grounded by pilots who chose survival over suicide missions. Years after the Gulf War ended, researchers gained access to previously classified Soviet and Warsaw Pact documents. Among them was a tactical briefing document dated 1985, distributed to fighter squadrons throughout the Soviet sphere of influence. Document title: Engagement Protocols, American F-15 Eagle Aircraft. The key passage, typed in official Soviet military format: direct engagement with F-15 aircraft is not recommended under standard combat conditions. Pilots encountering Eagles should request reinforcement before committing to engagement, should attempt to maneuver enemy aircraft into SAM coverage zones, should exploit terrain masking and low-altitude operations to minimize radar detection. Only if no alternatives exist and mission parameters absolutely require engagement should direct combat be initiated, and then only with confirmed numerical superiority of minimum 3-to-1 ratio. At the bottom of the document, added in handwriting by a senior officer whose signature was illegible, translation for clarity: do not fight the Eagle unless you want to die. This document, this official admission of American superiority, represented a psychological victory that transcended any tactical success. The enemy had acknowledged they could not compete, had ordered their pilots to avoid combat, had admitted defeat before battles were even fought. For Soviet aviators raised on stories of the Great Patriotic War, instructed from youth to embody aggressive offensive spirit, this directive carried weight beyond simple tactical guidance. It was an admission that the system had failed, that Western technology had prevailed, that decades of Soviet aviation development had produced aircraft unable to compete with American equivalents. If you believe American values, traditional values like innovation and determination, and refusing to accept defeat, are what make this country exceptional. Leave a comment below. Tell us what values matter most to you. Your generation lived through the Cold War, built the systems that kept us safe, and passed down wisdom we need today. If you or your family served during this era, share your stories. Your perspective matters to younger generations who never experienced these times. They need to hear from those who were there. Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, Washington, D.C. Present day. Retired Colonel David Goldstein, age 70, walks through the fighter aircraft gallery with his grandson Jake, age 10. They stop before an F-15 Eagle suspended from the ceiling, the same type aircraft Goldstein flew in combat 40 years earlier. Same distinctive twin tails, same swept wings, same aggressive stance suggesting lethal purpose, even motionless in museum display. "Grandpa, did you really fly this airplane?" "I did, Jake, long time ago, over Lebanon during a different war." "Did you shoot down enemy planes?" Goldstein pauses, thinking about Syrian pilots who never saw him coming, thinking about families left behind, thinking about necessary versus right versus good. Yes, I did. It was my job. It kept people safe, including your grandmother and your mother. But it was not something to be proud of in the way you might think. It was something necessary. There's a difference. But we won right because of planes like this. We prevented losing, which is different. This aircraft, he gestures at the eagle suspended above, prevented wars by making aggression too costly, deterred attacks by making victory impossible for enemies, saved lives by making killing so certain that opponents chose not to fight. Sometimes the battles you don't have to fight are more important than the ones you win. Jake considers this trying to understand complexity beyond his years. I don't really get it, Grandpa. You will when you're older. Come on, let's get ice cream. They walk away toward the museum cafe. The eagle hangs silently testament to engineering excellence and human cost, to victories counted and lives lost, to perfection achieved through sacrifice and fear and decades of effort. The story of the F-15 Eagle is ultimately a story about the nature of American power. It demonstrates that technological superiority, when combined with effective training and sound doctrine, can produce advantages difficult or impossible for adversaries to overcome. But it is also a story about cost, about engineers like Robert Mitchell, who sacrificed families for aircraft, about pilots like David Goldstein, who killed men they never saw and lived with that burden, about Syrian and Iraqi aviators sent to die in inferior equipment through no fault of their own. Robert Mitchell died in 2008, age 83. His daughter Sarah attended the funeral, though they had not spoken in years. His marriage to Ellen had collapsed in 1976, the year the F-15 entered service. His obsession with work had destroyed the family he claimed to be protecting. At the funeral, Sarah found a box of photographs among her father's possessions, pictures he had kept but never shown her. Her 16th birthday party he had missed, her high school graduation where he was absent, her wedding where he attended but seemed distant. Every milestone documented in photographs taken by others because he was working, because the aircraft mattered more or seemed to than being present for the moments that define a life. She cried looking at these pictures, not because he had missed the events, though that hurt, but because he had cared enough to keep the photographs, had carried the guilt of absence but never knew how to bridge the gap his choices created, had loved his family but loved his work more, or perhaps had loved his family so much that he sacrificed being with them to keep them safe. Understanding and forgiveness are not the same thing, but sometimes they are all we have. The F-15 Eagle continues flying today. Upgraded variants like the F-15EX incorporate technology from 6 decades of continuous development. An aircraft designed in the 1960s remains competitive in the 2020s through evolution and refinement. Some version of the Eagle will serve well into the 21st century, a longevity that speaks to the soundness of the original design and the single-minded focus that created it. 104 victories, 0 losses. No other fighter aircraft in history has achieved such a record. The Eagle has faced MiGs and Sukhois and Mirages from multiple nations. It has defeated them all. The record speaks for itself, requires no embellishment, stands as monument to American engineering and the pilots who flew it into combat. And somewhere in a dusty archive in Moscow, there remains a classified briefing document from the Cold War era. Its pages describe the American F-15 Eagle in clinical detail: radar range, missile capabilities, thrust-to-weight ratio, victory record, tactical recommendations. Its conclusion, added in handwritten note by an officer whose name is lost to history, remains simple and stark. Do not fight the Eagle unless you want to die. Soviet pilots who read those words understood their meaning clearly. The Eagle was not to be fought. It was to be feared. And that fear, more than any missile or cannon, was perhaps the F-15's most lethal weapon of all. Listen carefully to the lesson this aircraft teaches. American exceptionalism is not about always being strongest or never making mistakes. It is about responding to challenges with innovation and determination, about admitting when assumptions are wrong and correcting course, about creating systems so effective they deter war rather than wage it, about transforming fear into excellence through focused effort and unwavering commitment. The generation that created the F-15 understood this. They faced Soviet threats with fear, yes, but they transformed that fear into action, into aircraft, into superiority so complete that enemies chose not to fight. That is a legacy worth preserving. That is a lesson worth teaching to generations who never lived through those times. The eagle's shadow still falls across the skies, reminding everyone that some weapons are too perfect to challenge, some records too complete to dispute, some victories too absolute to forget. And sometimes being afraid of the right things leads us to create exactly what we need to overcome those fears. That is the story of the eagle. That is the legacy of American innovation born from Cold War terror. And that is why 50 years later, the aircraft still flies, the record remains unbroken, and the lesson endures. Fear, properly channeled, can create perfection that lasts for generations.